asked to identify the function which actually depicts this graph. We are given two functions. We are told that the function over here is the greatest integer function, that is the greatest integer which is less than or equal to x, and we have been given another function which is the fractional part of x, which is defined as x minus integral part of x. So before we get into that, let us first try to understand these two functions quite closely. If you are looking at a number which is say 1, which is an integer, then the integral part of x, which is the greatest integer less than or equal to x, will be equal to 1. And the fractional part of x is equal to 0. If you are looking at a fraction, if you are looking at say 1.5, then the greatest integer less than or equal to 1.5 is equal to 1, and the fractional part is equal to 0.5. If you are looking at another number like say 1.75, then the integer part again remains the same, it is equal to 1, and the fractional part now becomes equal to 0.75. If you are looking at some negative number, if you are looking at say minus 1, which is an integer, then the greatest integer which is less than or equal to minus 1 is again equal to minus 1, and the fractional part is again equal to 0. But if you are looking at a fraction which is negative, something like say minus 1.25, then the greatest integer which is less than or equal to minus 1.25 is now equal to minus 2. It is not equal to minus 1 because minus 1 is actually greater than minus 1.25. And what is the value of the fractional part of x? Fractional part of x will be minus 1.25 minus of minus 2, or basically it is 2 minus 1.25, which is equal to 0.75. So now if you are trying to plot the function of greatest integer of x, let us first draw the y-axis and the x-axis, and if you are trying to plot the function of greatest integer which is less than or equal to x from say minus 2 to plus 2. If this is say minus 2, if this is say minus 1, this is 0, this is say 1, and this is say 2. Between minus 2 and minus 1, the greatest integer which is less than or equal to x is equal to minus 2. So the function will be flat, it will be something like this. Between minus 1 and 0, the greatest integer less than or equal to x will be equal to minus 1. So it will be something like this. Between 0 and 1, the greatest integer which is less than or equal to x will be equal to 0. So it will be parallel to the x-axis. So it will be something like this. It will coincide with the x-axis. And between 1 and 2, the greatest integer which is less than or equal to x will be equal to 1. So it will be something like this. This is how the function greatest integer which is less than or equal to x works. If you are looking at the fractional part of x, so again let us draw a y-axis and an x-axis. And let us again compare the interval between minus 2 to minus 1, minus 1 to 0, and 1 to 2. Then when the value of x is a minus 2, the value of fraction part of x will be equal to 0. It will continue to increase and it will reach 1 by the time it will be just less than 1 when the value of x becomes equal to minus 1. For example, if you are comparing a number which is minus 1.001, the value of the greatest integer which is less than or equal to minus 1.001 is again equal to minus 2. So the fractional part of minus 1.001 is very close to 1. It will be equal to 0.999. This pattern will repeat from minus 1 to 0 also. It will be something like this. It will be again quite close to 1, but it won't touch 1. Same is the case from 0 to 1. Same is the case from 1 to 2. If you are looking at the graph that is given to us, this is a downward sloping graph. The value of the graph of fractional part of x is an upward sloping graph. So clearly you should identify that the graph that we have over here should have minus of fractional part of x. And if you are comparing greatest integer which is less than or equal to x, and if you add this to the fractional minus of the fractional part of x, and if you are trying to draw that graph, it will essentially be, if you are trying to superimpose on the graph of greatest integer less than or equal to x, you have to just put it downwards. This will be the graph of greatest integer of x minus fractional part of x. That is quite identical to the graph that we have. So the required answer will be the value of the function will be greatest integer of x minus the fractional part of x, which is integer part of x minus fractional part of x.